All right, so good morning. A lot of people are going to be sorry because the third exam is generally one of the hardest because you actually have to calculate stuff. So I guess they're not going to get the information on it. I guess that they can watch it on the web if the camcorder actually works. So today I would recommend, because I've had problems with this recorder, if you are here and you want the exam review and you want to know what's on the exam, which is right here. I took it myself again. I made 100 on it. And so it's fair and balanced like Fox News. I said that before. I'll say it again. It's good. Redundancy is good. You'll want to put your devices up here in case the camcorder fails, which it has been doing recently, and I'm not sure why that is. Another announcement that I want to make. All you wait until the end if you want to. I'll tell you before I start. If you want to, you're always welcome to record. Yeah, I've said that before. You know, that's obviously recording. But if you want to wait and just get the actual exam review, you can do that. I will give you some time before I start again on the lecture, on the test lecture. I'll give you some time to put your stuff up here so that you can actually get that. You need to check D2L. There have been a number of people that dropped throughout this course of the semester that didn't come off of D2L. Some that are still in D2L and they dropped. I know they dropped, and so I still recorded the score. So as I was going down the list, but if you didn't get a score for the group project, please look and make sure that you got a score. It's entirely possible in between looking at the cover sheets, my notes, and then averaging the votes that I overlooked somebody. In fact, I had one person text me and say that she didn't get a grade, and so I want you all to be sure and look at your grades on D2L to make sure that if you did participate in the group project, that you did get a vote. If you want to know how I calculated the grades on the group vote, you're welcome to come see me. Obviously on the individual papers, the article reviews, those were turned into D2L, and I gave you feedback through D2L on those in terms of using the rubric and then also inserting comments on each of those individual papers. I have comments on them if you're interested in knowing how I came up with the grade. It is based on an analysis of both the written work and then also your overall performance. Some of the things that led to lower scores were some groups didn't use the minimum number of sources. That led to a decrease in points. One group only used one source, so I can't give you full credit for the format when you didn't use at least 3 sources. Other things were just overall presentation. Some people's presentations were better than others, and so that was a consideration. And those are somewhat subjective, although I try to be as objective as I possibly can in comparing the groups and their presentations to each other. But if you want to talk to me about that, you're more than welcome to come to my office. I'll be happy to set up an appointment and let you see where it was that your group lost points if you're interested in that kind of discussion. I will not let you see how your fellow members voted, and that is confidential. But if you think that you were unfairly judged, you're also welcome to come see me on that. We are doing for the UCO AMA, and I thought Jonathan was going to be here today to talk about it. We're doing a canned food drive for the UCO AMA as part of our chapter plan. So we compete with other chapters based on these kinds of things that we do, and one of the things that we do is service to the community, and that's one of the areas that we compete at. And so we want to do well. We're doing a canned food drive again this year. Some of you have asked if there are going to be more opportunities for bonus points. This is an opportunity for you to have bonus points. If you will bring in a canned food, I will give you 1 point per can of food that you bring in to add to your test scores, and I'm saying it will be added to your test scores. That it will be added to test scores. So for that component of the grade, I will add bonus points to your test scores. Your lowest test score that's not dropped, up to 10 points for 1 point per can. If you bring them in next week, I'll count the cans and I'll write it down. And we're going to drop them off in the UCO marketing office so that we can get our service points on our chapter plan and chapter report for this year. So up to 10 points going to your exam scores, and we'll do that. You can bring it in either Tuesday or Thursday of next week. I think we'll have boxes by then. I'll count them, and that's an opportunity for you to get bonus points for that. Today we need to talk about marketing channels. And I have to admit that of all of the chapters and all of the topics in the principles course, it is the one that I know the least about and the one that I am the least interested in. When I went to get my PhD, I did not want to leave Oklahoma. I dearly love the great and sovereign state of Oklahoma. It is a perversion I share only with consenting adults. And so I have no desire to leave. And I didn't want to leave the state to get my PhD, and so there are 2 PhD programs in marketing in the state. One is at OU, and the other is at OSU. And so I trotted down to OU to talk to them about getting a PhD. And they said, well, we'll certainly admit you. You look like a strong candidate. You've got a master's degree. You've got a Juris Doctorate. And we'd be happy to have you in the program. But we have to tell you that we are a transportation, logistics, and marketing channel school. And so you better be prepared to focus your research and your dissertation on logistics and supply chain. And I thought, yeah, I can't imagine anything more boring than doing logistics studies and supply chain studies. And so I kindly declined their offer of admission to OU. It makes sense that we would be a logistics and supply chain school at OU because where is Oklahoma located? Right in the heartland, smack dab in the middle of the country. And so there's lots of research opportunities because we have lots of transportation that runs through Oklahoma. How many highways, for example, do we have running through Oklahoma City? Well, we have I-40, which is the major highway that runs east and west of the country. And we have a major north-south highway, that's I-35, and then we also have I-44. And so it would make sense that they would do that. And then I went up to OSU to talk to them. They had a program that was more in my field in that they have a public policy and marketing program and a public policy and marketing center in their Department of Marketing at OSU. But they weren't ever graduating anybody. And if you go into a PhD program, you want to graduate. And so I went down to New Mexico State where there was a person that was interested in ethics. And they promised me that if I did the work, I would graduate in 4 years or less. And I thought that sounded like a good deal, so I trotted off to New Mexico to get my PhD. My time spent in New Mexico was the worst 4 years of my life. I absolutely hated it. It was hot and dry and nothing to do there except bake in the hot, hot sun on the border. And so, but that's where I got my PhD. So I'm just giving you forewarning that logistics and supply chain channels are not my favorite aspect of marketing. It is a very old part of marketing. It's one of the first fields. And if you go back to that first definition of marketing that we talked about at the beginning of the semester, it largely focuses on this logistics and transportation aspect, or channels aspect of marketing, and that it's concerned with moving goods from producer to consumer. And that's what that first definition of marketing, beginning with the American Marketing Teachers Association, which is the forerunner of the AMA, came up with it. It's a very old field, and I talked to you about sort of those early studies in marketing where agricultural economists actually got on trains and saw where they went. And there's a modern example of this, and you should know this for a test. A woman named Rose George writes a book called 90% of Everything, and she starts out by asking people, and this is really a modern-day logistics study. She gets on a container ship and she follows it from England all the way through the pirate waters around Somalia and Africa, through the Suez Canal, and then to a final destination. And she tracks what goes on, and she details things like what is the cost, and I think I've told you this before. For example, 90% of everything, if you ask people how much is shipped, they'll say not much, maybe 10 or 15%. It's actually 90% is shipped in container ships around the world. One of the things that allows for really cheap smartphones is that they are shipped on container ships. What does it cost to ship a smartphone on a container ship from China to an American port? Have I told you this? It's 3 cents. 3 to 5 cents is what it costs to ship. It's absolutely a de minimis amount, and so shipping is enormously important. And this is one of these kinds of logistics studies that we saw in the early days of marketing. And so channels is an important part of marketing, and getting goods from producer to consumer is an important part, but it's certainly not my favorite part of marketing, although I did go ahead and read Rose's book because I thought, well, I should know something about this part of marketing that I really didn't have any interest in or any desire to know about until I got my PhD. So it's one of the oldest subfields in marketing. And again, if you look at that first definition, it really focuses on the logistics function in marketing. Marketing channels consist of individuals and firms that are involved in the process of making products or services available to customers or business end users. So it's everybody in that chain, from producer to consumer. And so we think about this in terms of intermediaries, and a lot of times we think of these people as being bad, and we don't know that they add value, and they actually do. And we want to talk about cutting out the middleman if you're a consumer, to save money. But they really do add value, and they are important. And even though we've seen what's called in marketing disintermediation, which is a reduction in the number of intermediaries because of things like the internet, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, we are also seeing reintermediation because they do add value and they are important. And I'll give you an example of that. So there are various terms that are used for intermediaries, and you should know what these are for an exam. Middleman is any intermediary between the manufacturer and the end user. So there are lots of different names that they go by. One is maybe an agent or a broker. And one of the things that we look at is some intermediaries do take title to products and pass them on, or services. And so that plays an important function in terms of possession utilities. We'll talk about the 4 utilities in just a second. But there are agents or brokers. These people oftentimes don't take possession of the property. What's a classic example of an intermediary between a seller and a buyer that is an agency relationship? It's based on the law of agency. It's what?
Jewelry store.
What?
Jewelry store.
A jewelry store? They actually take possession of a lot of stuff. How about real estate brokers? Do your real estate agents buy your homes? No, they act as an intermediary of function. They have a function of bringing buyers and sellers together, but they don't actually take title to the property. They just facilitate the transaction. And so oftentimes these people, agents or brokers, don't actually take possession or legal title to the property, but they act just on behalf or as a legal authority for another to facilitate the transaction. As such, it's governed by the law of agency. This is a test question, you should know this. And they have a fiduciary duty, usually, to act on behalf of their principal in their principal's best interest. And that fiduciary duty comprises 3 things. A duty of loyalty. They have a duty to not self-deal. So to act, a duty of loyalty. So they have a duty to not act in their own self-interest, but in the interest of their principal. They have a duty of obedience to act as directed. So when you list your house with your real estate agent, they have a duty of obedience. They can't sell your house for less than you want. They can't go off and do it on their own. They have to have your consent. And they have a duty of care to not create waste. A wholesaler is an intermediary who sells to other people in the channel, usually to retailers. So if you think about this, there are people like U.S. Foods. U.S. Foods is a wholesaler. They don't produce the food. They don't produce the beef and the corn and all of the stuff, but they sell it to who? To restaurants who retail the food. You can have a distributor. This is an imprecise term. And they may or may not take title. In the company that I worked for, we had a distributor network. We didn't employ them. They were independent contractors. They were distributors. They didn't actually take title to our product, but they went out and did the marketing functions. to sell to schools, arrange for contracts, and then we ship the product directly from the company. So they were distributors that were also basically like agents for our company. And a dealer is an even more imprecise term that can mean a distributor, a retailer, like a Ford dealership, or a wholesaler, or an authorized agent, somebody like an AT&T dealer. A lot of you, how many of you have AT&T or Verizon? Did you buy it at a corporate store or did you buy it at a authorized dealer? It's hard to tell a lot of times, but usually they'll say on the store, authorized dealer for AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile. Intermediaries create value by providing a transactional function. They buy and sell products and they take a risk in doing this. So when US Foods buys food from producers, from cattle producers and from farmers or canners or manufacturers of goods, they take a risk, right? As long as it's in their possession. What happens in Oklahoma? A lot of times during the spring and fall, they thought there were threats of tornadoes last week. And a lot of times we get hit by tornadoes and things are get wiped out. They take a risk. They have that product in their inventory and they're taking a risk. If it gets hit by a tornado, they're the ones who bear the risk of loss. They provide a logistics function in terms of getting the product from the producers, warehousing it, and then delivering it to retailers, restaurants that are going to use it. And then they oftentimes provide facilitating functions like extending credit. For my business, we have a restaurant that goes along with our bed and breakfast, and we have credit with US Foods. So they provide, for example, 30 days credit terms, which is a facilitating function that helps us operate and manage cash flow. And it makes it more attractive to buyers. A lot of stores now, retailers who are part of the supply chain, offer you company or store credit cards. How many of you have a store credit card? For Macy's or Dillard's or does American Eagle still have a credit card? They provide this facilitating function in that they allow you to buy it on their credit card and basically make payments for the rest of your natural life, which you will not be able to discharge in bankruptcy. They provide value in terms of the four utilities: time, having it available when you want it; place, where you want it; and form. US Foods buys bulk amounts of meat or bulk amounts of produce or canned goods. Do you want to buy an entire pallet of green beans? No, you don't. Who said yes? You're another one. Green beans are a staple in my house. We're constantly. It's a southern thing with bacon, right? Mashed potatoes. How many of you fry your green beans or bake or boil your green beans in bacon grease? It's the reason why we have heart problems. We have a higher risk of heart, because it's meat, potatoes, and green beans and bacon. Form, enhancing it to make it more attractive. So they break it down into smaller amounts. And then possession, helping the consumers take possession of it. Marketing channels can be direct, and this is disintermediation, and the web has produced a lot of disintermediation. And stuff that I never thought that we would disintermediate, we actually do. I never thought I would buy clothes online, but I do, because I hate going to the mall. And I love French cuff dress shirts. I have several hundred of them. I am like a marketer's dream. And I buy them mostly from Charles Tyrwhitt, which is a British haberdasher. And I buy them online because I know that they make them to the style and cut and size that I want. And so I buy directly from the manufacturer, which is Charles Tyrwhitt, and it's disintermediated. We're seeing re-intermediation, though, in a lot of things. So forever and ever and ever, when Dell got started, Dell disintermediated. They didn't have any intermediaries. How did you buy a Dell when Dell first got started, if you wanted a Dell? You had to go online, or you had to call the company, and you bought it directly from them, and they shipped the Dell to you. Now, they have started to re-intermediate. Why? Why is Dell re-intermediated? Particularly with things like laptops. What's important about a laptop for most people?
Portability.
Portability, which means that you want to be able to feel what? My first laptop was this big brick thing. And it weighed, I don't know, like 10 pounds. You know? What do you want? What do you like about that Apple that you got right there? Works really well. Is it light?
Yep.
Did you want to try it before you bought it? Apples are expensive, so that was probably what, $1,200? You tried your friends before you bought it. So you wanted to feel it. Laptops, one of the things that you want to know is that A, it's light enough that you can carry it around, but also you want to be able to test out the keyboard. I have really fat, chunky fingers, and so smaller keyboards, web books don't work very well for me. So I want something that's light enough that I can carry it on the plane and do things like that when I go to conferences, but that has a big enough keyboard that I'm comfortable using it because I can type really fast. I can type at 150 words a minute. And so if I have too small of a keyboard, I can't do that. So I wanted to try it out. So Dell realizes this, and now they sell. You can still buy direct from Dell, but they have started to intermediate, and then you can now go to Best Buy and buy Dells because you might want to test the laptop out. You might want to pick it up, maybe see how light it is, see how big the screen is. Another thing that's important with laptops is what? Screen size. If you go to too small a screen, you can't really see what you're working on. And so those kinds of things are important. So most are indirect, where you have intermediaries between this, and you can see the diagrams on 380 and 381 in the old textbook. And so you have a distributor, you have a manufacturer, a wholesaler maybe, and then a retailer. That would be a fairly direct, but less direct than direct line, where you may have even more intermediaries between that. And they give you some examples of both business to business and business to consumer markets. Multi-channel marketing is using a blend of different channels of communication that are mutually reinforcing. So for example, Ralph Lauren sells how? They sell on the web. You can buy it through Ralph Lauren website. They also have what? Ralph Lauren outlets and stores. If you go out to the outlet mall, there's a Ralph Lauren store. And they also sell through other retailers like Macy's, Dillard's, all of those. A dual distribution strategy is one where you sell, in one instance to this, for example, GE sells appliances, your textbook tells you, directly to home builders to install in homes, but they then use retailers and intermediaries to sell to consumers. You can have a vertically integrated or professionally managed and coordinating channel system. There are a number of these corporate systems. For example, the Ralph Lauren system where they have a manufacturer. They also sell online or to their stores or also to retailers. De Beers is now a vertically integrated producer. So De Beers finally came off of the United States government antitrust list several years ago. What is De Beers? Anybody know what De Beers is?
Diamond.
They're the diamond people, right? And so a lot of times students will ask me about Jewish conspiracies. If you want to talk about a Jewish conspiracy, De Beers is owned by the Oppenheimer family, who are Jewish, and they controlled for most of the 20th and 21st century the diamond trade. They've now gotten under 80% of the diamond trade, but they were the most successful cartel in history. So they didn't actually own a lot of the diamond. They did own one of the diamond mines in South Africa. But what they did, diamonds are actually kind of a semi-precious stone. They said every time a diamond mine or diamonds would be discovered, they would go in and say, you will either sell through De Beers or we will flood the market. And so they controlled the diamond industry through this cartel of selling, and they had people who were sites. All diamonds until very recently were purchased through a De Beers site. All of the retailers like B.C. Clark, Helzberg, and these others would buy from diamond sites, and there were only a limited number of sites. I think there were only something like 35 in the United States sites. And if De Beers didn't like you, if you were a site, and they didn't like you, they would give you bad diamonds. They could basically ruin your business. They've now gotten off the U.S. government's antitrust list, and they've started to vertically integrate. So if you go to, for example, the Galleria in Dallas or the Galleria in Houston, there are now De Beers stores where they're actually selling direct to consumers, and it's a vertically integrated marketing system. There are also contractual systems where they're wholesale sponsored, things like the International Grocers Association. If you go to little towns, you'll still see IGAs around, or retail sponsored, like ACE, vertically integrated systems. The channel choice will depend on how you go about using channels and which channels you use will depend on three critical questions. What is the best coverage for your product or service? What will satisfy the buying requirements of your target market? And which channel will be most profitable? So you can have an intensive, which is usually used for convenience products. You sell them everywhere. If you want to sell, for example, Kit Kat, right? They sell Kit Kats all over the place. You can buy them at 7-Eleven. They're not very exclusive. You can buy them in the vending machines out here in the student lounge. You can buy them at Homeland or Walmart, things like that. It's an intensive. At the opposite end, you have exclusive specialty products, where you have very few. What are the number of retail outlets for Rolex in the Oklahoma City area? One. Who is it? B.C. Clark. They're the only ones. Samuel Gordon, who was across the street until they went out of business, was a Rolex dealer for about 5 years. They started undercutting the price of Rolex because they were competing with B.C. Clark, which was located in Penn Square Mall. Rolex found out about it, and they revoked their Rolex authorized dealership because Rolex does not discount. So there's only one, B.C. Clark, right? That's the only Rolex dealer. There are only 3 in the state, so it's an exclusive. At the and in between these two extremes, you can have a selective, which lies in between, where you use certain outlets. Dell, for example, uses a selective. They don't sell them in all of the retail outlets that you can buy. They sell them in certain selected retail outlets. Any questions on channels? All right, I will let you bring up your devices if you want, and I will go over the third exam. I have posted, by the way, the pricing lecture online. It's been updated to D2L. I should get I have the first day student presentations up there, and I should have the other 2 up shortly. I will get this one up today as quickly as I possibly can. Hopefully before 5 o'clock today, I should have the video up for those. Okay, so for this third exam, you may bring a calculator because you may need to calculate some things. There are, I believe, 5 questions that ask for calculations. They are calculating the final price, an actual discount. So you need to know the formulas for these. Calculating a profit. Calculating the break-even point. And then either, depending on the version of the exam that you get, calculating a target profit or a target return on sales. So you need to know the formulas for all of those and be able to calculate it. Bring a calculator. I will not let you use your phone because you can put other stuff on the phone. What? You can put other things on the phone. So your phone calculator is not going to work. You can buy a calculator for cheap at, Walmart. You can buy them for a couple bucks if you don't have one. We've discussed typologies of brands, and there were a couple of authors that developed typologies of brands, and you should know who they are. And you should know what are the important elements of developing a brand within those typologies. And I added one to that typology. You need to know what that is that I talked about. And then once you develop your brand, you have to manage it. And you should know how you manage the brand. So for example, it's things like the brand stays relevant. And we talked about a specific example in class. I used Marriott. I tried to show a video. The video didn't work, but I did talk about Marriott. Now, Marriott uses all of these brand management things in that they have multiple brands. But their brand portfolio and hierarchy makes sense. All of their brands are related to what? Hospitality. So it's all within a single industry. They understand what the brand means to their customers. We talked about developing products, new products, and you should know about that. And within that, the product life cycle. And what you should do based on the life cycle. So there's introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. So for example, what do you generally do in the declining stages of a product's life? And we talked about, for example, in new products, I gave you the example of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola has lots of different brands, right? They're constantly coming up with new stuff. Because I think that, at least in the United States, Coca-Cola is really in the declining stage, or at least in the maturity stage. And so they're coming out with new products, things like what? Dasani water, sports drinks, things like that. And I used one example in talking about that, which is they have a brand that they still produce because there are some people that are absolutely loyal to it, but it's really harvesting. It's Tab. Did we talk about that? I asked you if any of you had actually ever tried a Tab. It was one of the first diet colas. It's really horrific. But a lot of people are still committed to it. They don't invest in advertising it. They don't pay a lot of attention to it. It's mostly a harvesting strategy. The lack of profit in the introductory stage of the product cycle is often the product life cycle as a result of what? At which stage in the product life cycle do you try to create awareness and stimulate demand? And then there are some substantive examples of companies that it asks you about. What happens when more competitors launch their own products? How does pricing strategy coincide with the product life cycle? What kinds of pricing strategies, for example, would you use to recoup the cost of product development? Along with that, you should understand the different strategies such as skimming, harvesting, penetration pricing. With regards to services, I talked about an author, Mary Jo Bittner, who says that all services or all goods are really services. And what's one example of something that we might value intrinsically, not for the service it provides? That may be art. You should understand how this idea of intangibility, inconsistency, inseparability, and inventory costs affect services marketing from products marketing. What makes it different? For example, it's difficult to evaluate. There are certain credence properties that are hard to evaluate with regard to services. How should you, and I think the example I used is how should you, for example, evaluate the quality of a lawyer? How are you going to judge whether or not a lawyer is a good lawyer?
Their office.
Huh?
Their office.
Their office, maybe. And I talked about the fact that in my law school career, at trial practice, my trial practice professor invited us up to his law firm. He had been in private practice for many years before he became a professor, and he was a named partner of one of the firms. There was this beautiful table, and he had a whole spread out there. You can't necessarily do it by wins, right? Because some really dumb lawyers have really high win ratios. District attorneys, for example, the dumbest kids in my law school class went into the DA's office, couldn't figure out that you're coming out $150,000 in debt, making 45, it's going to be really hard to service that. But they have great win-loss ratios, right? Because the criminals are even dumber than they are. There's a substantive example that asks you about these ideas of intangibility, inseparability, which it is. How can you reduce inventory carrying costs in services? Your text talks about that. Also, the way services can be classified, the different ways. Are they for-profit, not-for-profit? Are they delivered by people or by automation? You should understand the definition of credence properties. You should understand with regard to services the gaps analysis. The 5 key dimensions in that of service quality according to your text, which you need to think about. With regard to price, you need to know the different terms that we use for price. So for example, you pay what for this education? Tuition. Medical doctors charge fees. You need to understand and be able to identify the equations that we talked about. How do you determine value in price? What is the equation for determining value? What are pricing objectives? There's an example in your textbook about, if you have the older edition, about specialty retail toy stories, or toy sellers, and the fact that they're pursuing basically a survival pricing strategy. FAO Schwartz, for example, and I talked about that also in the lecture. If a firm forgoes higher profits, how is it pricing? If it wants to recognize certain other obligations, for example. What are some of the constraints to pricing that you have to think about? Barriers to entry. There's a question that again asks you about which of the following statements about the product life cycle is most accurate with regarding price constraints. And then being able to identify those different pricing strategies, skimming, penetration, prestige pricing, odd even pricing, price lining, bundling. You need to be able to distinguish between cost-oriented approaches and demand-oriented approaches to pricing. Do you all have any questions? 50 questions. There is a bonus question. There are also a question about Mason's presentation. What were some examples, for example, the benefits of a sales major or minor that he talked about? And there was an example of success that we talked about. That's a test question. And the bonus question is, what was the color of Mason's tie? It was green. Any other questions?